Greetings, brothers and sisters. This is a pre-introduction. I've done a couple introductions here because it's been necessary. And it occurred to me, I had this up, but there was a copyright issue with the West Wing clips that I play here. So I had to redo it. And I, had the idea that this video might reach a larger audience than my normal videos. We'll see what happens. But if it does, just a brief introduction to this channel. I have two channels. Both of them are comedy channels. They're light channels. Whatever it is. I don't really put much seriousness in what I say here, regardless of the subject matter. One's called Apocalypse Now. The other channel's called Apocalypse Now. And I make videos 7 days a week, and I alternate channels. And so you can find a link to my other channel in this description box. And this video might be one I'm doing for free, right? They might not run ads on it just because Hitler's in the title. I think whatever. But if that's the case, I'm just letting you know this is how I make my living. And I'm going to put it up anyway because I just think it's, I've been led to make this video for a variety of reasons. But anyways, here's the other pre-introduction. Greetings, brothers and sisters. So I just want to do a short pre-introduction to this video. I started the video yesterday. And there were some things I don't cover in the introduction, some basic, maybe the most important points. This video is a little different because it probably will just go out to my regular viewers, but it's for a broader audience outside the truth community and, people in general. It's just about questioning your reality. And what I've found over the years, I used to talk in more absolute terms, like I knew stuff, right? Like I was, pretty sure of the truth or narratives. I was pretty sure of I was sure and pretty sure and talked about things like they were a fact. When I first started making these videos back in 2014 and 15, after I had, plunged into the various narratives of the existing narratives of the truth community. And so I would talk like, this is fact, this is fact, this is fact, And it wasn't, right? I soon found out there was as much disinformation in the truth community. But even in that, the whole idea that planet Earth is an illusionary place, that it's Maya, in the ancient Sanskrit word of Maya, or illusion, that physical life, even though it's tangible, even though it's, it seems so real, even though it's, you can experience it with your senses, is in itself illusionary. Colors are illusionary, they're reflecting back the color, right? It's not the color. It's reflecting back the color. The color that you see, if you see yellow, whatever is that's yellow is absorbing all the other colors, right? All the colors that are in the prismatic, the light, the various colors that are in the bands of light. And it's reflecting back the color that it's rejecting, in a sense, right? It's absorbing all the other colors. But, it's just, there's so many different ways that you can explain the idea that the material world is illusionary. And then there's the spiritual component. There's a spiritual reason for everything that's happening here, right? Just like on the internet or on the, in your computer, everything that's you see is code. So what you see is the, code expressing something. This video is code, right? It isn't me. It isn't my voice. It isn't even the images you're seeing. It's some sort of computer code that is, you can look at it. Like you can look at the code behind what you're seeing, right? And that's a good metaphor for spirit and energetic components of all life. That you have an energetic component that's producing your existence here, your soul and your subtle bodies. And so unless you can see that level, the spiritual reason for everything that's happened here, and you can trace it back historically, you could read the Akashic records, then you would never be able to know exactly what's going on, right? There's always deeper levels, deeper meanings. So even if you have the truth on one level, that's certainly true and certainly, not a lie or an illusion, but you get to the truth, there's deeper levels of, spiritual understanding, right? And this is what I'm talking about here, that, there's never any, oh, I know this for sure. Like there just isn't. And I deal with that. We all deal with that with the mainstream media. These are the facts, right? These are the facts. These are the facts that we, it's the mainstream story. We all deal with that with our sheeple friends and relatives who, this is what the authority says. This is fact. Why are you questioning this, right? We all deal with it, but we deal with it here in the truth community because so many people are rigid in their thinking, right? The more rigid somebody is, the more that they say that they know, the less that they know, right? The more rigid they are in their consciousness, the more they have to cling to. You're given these, fundamental building blocks of your life through your society and through your education. And people who cling to those facts and, they can't confront that it's disinformation or just, it's just limited, right? It might not even be intentional disinformation. It's just limited. And so, people in a society, in a village, in a city, in a country or a world, they have certain things that they believe they know to be true. And some of those things are, the opposite is true, right? And historically, I'm going to get into the history here. This is specifically what I'm covering. I'm not covering science or, some of the other things that you could look at, but just history, because history is a story. It's somebody's subjective story, and there's villains and there's good guys and bad guys. There was this great article with, it was videos, and it was an article I read years ago, and I would have trouble finding it. It was probably 10, 15 years ago or whatever it is. Maybe 8, I don't know. But it was quite a long time in terms of the internet. And it documented how a reality TV show could cast anybody as the villain, right? A reality TV show has certain archetypal roles that it has to fill. It has to fill these various spots. And you need a villain because the villain drives the storyline. And it talks about how, there's another article that talked about how Donald Trump was, like a villain, using the villain sort of model as in reality TV as he ran for president, right? And the villain is what drives the story. Like there'll be a person that's not going to win, but as soon as that person disappears, it becomes less interesting, the show, right? All those dating shows, The Bachelor, there's always villains, there's always, these people. But this article and this video, the video, the video component of it was it showed how they took a lot of footage for reality, like they made their own fake reality TV show, and they took footage, and they could use the footage to, and they could contrast the footage of different time periods, right? They could show a person in the interview room giving a narration, and then they show clips of people talking about that person or maybe talking about somebody else, but it was used to demonize a person, right? But then they showed how they could also make that person look like a hero. And so they had enough footage to make a person look like a hero or a villain or a victim, right? And it's just a matter of how they edited it and, how they, portrayed it. And you can see that in these reality TV shows. You can see the way that they frame these narratives. And that's how all of this stuff is. And depending on who you're watching and, which perspective you're watching, there's all these people who they watch a video and they think they know. Oh, yeah, I didn't know before, now I know, right? And they come in hard and they're like so sure of themselves. But then you show something else, the opposite position, and they're like, oh, no, this is the truth, right? And so, you have to be mentally flexible to understand that it's all a manipulation, and that these narratives, especially the fundamental building blocks we are given by our school system and our society, are not true. And the people that run the system are not trustworthy, but neither is anybody else, even individual people on the internet. You can't trust them, not only in terms of them lying, but also the lies that they themselves believe. What are the lies that they believe? And so, this is what this video is about. It's perspective and, people's ability to understand that there isn't absolutes like we think there are. Even in, the scientific community, there isn't these absolutes. There's always a deeper story. Unless you penetrate to the spiritual realm of existence and understand the play of things and maybe tracing things over multiple lives and multiple, centuries, or even, back to the source and the divine plan behind everything, right? And so I just, I'm using these examples of Hitler and Thomas Jefferson and Abraham Lincoln and some of these other people, and the idea of the villain role, right? Who's a villain? Who's considered a villain? Who's considered a hero? And how that plays out, right? And what people, just things that we think we know, and what's accepted, but questioning those things, right? Not in some, I'm not, out to get anybody. I'm not, out to disparage one group or another, but just to say that what we think is reality isn't. And so let's get into it here. Let's go to where I started yesterday. Greetings, brothers and sisters. So this is a different kind of video that I think I've done before. I haven't done a video like this at least in a while. And I have some extra time because my one video got demonetized, and I'm waiting for them to pass it through. And so I'm ending up making a video and a half a day, which I got some, finished with the bulldozer thing, and it's raining, so I have a little extra time, and I just have a Journey series video up that's going to be released pretty soon. And so this is a good time to do this video. But anyways, what this video is about, and you're using a provocative title, and I'll get into the comparison here in a moment, is that history is not fact. History is literally his story. Like they say, herstory, right, for her story. History is somebody's story, one side of the story, right? When something happens in your life, something happens at work, something happens in your family, everybody has a version of it. Everybody sees it a different way through their personal prejudicial lens, through the information that they saw, right? There's a time where I was, we were going through the beginning of the divorce process, and my ex was going back to America. We were in Sri Lanka, and she ran out of medication, thyroid medication, and was flipping out. And I was working on a video because, I was just trying to make this channel. The channel was just popping then, and so it was a whole thing. And so my ex went with my kids to this place where they had these things called string hoppers, right? These little nests of noodles, these little round discs of noodles. And they'd put dal, it was Indian type food. A little bit spicy, but we all liked it, right? And my kids were there with her, and she gave them the talk, your dad's a bad guy kind of a talk, right? And I always call it the string hopper talk because it's just funny. And I asked each of my kids about, what was said. And they all had different stories. They all had different things that stood out to them, right? That's just how life is, right? Life is not life, but people. That's how people are. Our versions of a reality are all different. And whosever story becomes sort of the factual history is the people that run the system, right? That's the victors. The victors tell the historical story, right? The what's considered factual history. But it's, far from factual. So you can call someone a murderer, but it could be slander. It could be, it could be any number of things, and it won't be true. But if somebody is convicted of murder, you can call them a murderer. The judicial system, it's because the judicial system has said this person's a murderer, right? And now it's considered a fact. But what if the jury got it wrong? What if the person didn't do the murder? Or what if it, was self-defense? There's any number of ways that it isn't factual, right? But it's considered fact. And we have now an authority, a scientific authority, a news media authority, a governmental authority, and they determine what the facts are. In social media, what the facts are. Who gets to say the facts? This is the idea of the authoritative news, right? which is the same kind of behavior that they're criticizing with somebody like Hitler, where it's a one-sided view, where it's, and right now it's a very leftist view. We're right, you're wrong, and we make up the rules, and we tell you what's what, right? And that's, mansplaining. But even, it's the same mansplaining that many of these various groups complained about in the past. And the interesting part about this, I first learned about this idea from the liberal community, which was questioning the conservative history, the right-wing history, all the way back from England and Europe and then in America, right? Was looking at Howard Zinn's book, which I'll get into in a bit. And, my undergraduate at a very liberal, I went to 2 liberal schools, my third attempt at college and then my master's degree. And Springfield College of Human Services, I learned about this idea that history was decided by the winner, by the victor. But now the liberals are the victors. They're the ones that control the power, and they're trying to silence the right. And the truth community even more so. It's interesting, right? That you whine about something when you don't have it, right? And then when you have the power, you engage in the same behavior. The behavior you criticized in other people, despots and dictators and all these things. And so I don't know. I don't know the answers to these questions because they're at a multi-levels. I'm going to go through the various levels. We're going to start off with the mundane human behavior, judging people by their behaviors, what they're known for. This is also going to be about yay. It's going to be about a lot of different things, right? But looking at it from various lenses, right? Looking at it at various lenses. Let's start this thing with the Howard Zinn thing. So when I was in undergraduate school, there's a book called The People's History, which was supposed to be written from the people who were oppressed, from the Native Americans, from the slaves, from the people who, didn't get to voice their side of the story, right? And it started off with Christopher Columbus. And up until that point, Christopher Columbus was a national hero. There are statues of Christopher Columbus that discovered America, idea that he discovered America, all this stuff, right? The idea was, what I heard, one thing that he did that was great is that he saw he was by the harbor and he was watching the ships come up over the horizon. And when you can see a ship, you need binoculars. It takes, it's a distance. When you see the ship coming over the horizon, there is, you start to see the mast of the ship because it's coming over the round earth. And I know there's going to be flat earthers, let me just say something about that, right? Because, I don't care what people believe. That's been what I've realized or what I've matured into from doing what I'm doing here. And whether it's liberal people, which I very seldom deal with, or, conservatives, whether it was the Cubies and various other groups. And the first group was the flat earthers. When the idea of the flat earth was out there, and I did my own research and I came up with my, some of the things that I said was evidence about, what I consider evidence that the earth is round. And I made videos about it, and there was just no sense of ever, the people that I was dialoguing with were so sure of themselves, and became a problem because, with the comment I made about Christopher Columbus, someone would write, multiple people would write, it's flat. It just became this bumper sticker talk and very annoying. But when I, asked people questions about it, I had some messages, exchanges, and things. In the beginning, I wanted to find out what it was about, right? Because I was interested in it. I wanted to see if it was something that I would, believe in. And it wasn't. I was at the ocean at the time, and I had, there's things about it that I'm not going to discuss it here because people had made their decision already. But what I got was long videos, 6-hour videos, 4-hour videos, 2-hour videos. And the majority of the videos was about how the earth isn't round, proving the earth isn't round, right? And, I'm just talking about flat earthers here, but it could be anybody, any group. And very little was the theory of how the flat earth model worked is not, or at least back then wasn't very developed. Again, please don't send me stuff, don't want to hear it. That's not what this is about. But that's how people are, because they give you two options. And the first option is demonizing one belief, right? Demonizing a person or a group, or disparaging a person or a group. And then they give you a solution. They give you a binary solution, like Biden's bad, therefore Trump must be good. But it's even more so, Trump is horrible and Biden is an alternative and he must be good, right? There has to be a good guy, and that's how they've woven our psyche and our, the lens in which we view the world. There's a good guy and a bad guy. There's a binary system. And if you identify the bad guy, then the other guy's got to be the good guy. And so they spend most of their time, any group, and this is what I was talking about with flat earthers, in disparaging the original model, the round earth model. But just because, let's say you could prove the earth wasn't round, let's say you definitively prove the earth wasn't round on a scientific level, that doesn't mean it's flat, right? There's multiple other explanations. The number one would be that this is a simulation, which it is. We're living in this isn't reality. Our souls are our reality. This is, our bodies are something different. Our physical three-dimensional reality seems real because of our senses, because we can physically touch things and all of it. But, a video game seems real to the whatever's in a video game, right? And even, when you're in virtual reality, that seems real. And so, it's an illusion. It's all an illusion. But what I'm saying here is people spend most of the time disproving the other side and giving a solution that may be just as false as the thing they're disproving, right? So going back to Christopher Columbus, he was limited. People were limited to the idea that you'd fall off the edge of the earth. And Christopher Columbus didn't believe that because he saw the ships coming over the horizon. And so if he did something great, it was that. Like he pushed past the existing limitations of the time, right? But he was going to India and he discovered America. But what makes him a villain or potential villain is when he got there, he wanted gold. And there were these people, he landed in the Bahamas, called the Arawaks, that no longer exist. There was like 250,000 of them. This is according to Howard Zinn's book. And they wanted gold, and they were like cutting people's hands off if they didn't get gold for them. I mean, horrible stuff. You can read about this for yourself and determine what you believe. But Christopher Columbus discovering America, so-called America, there are people already here, wasn't great for the Native Americans. He's not a hero to the Native Americans and various other groups. He's not a hero to slaves, the African slaves. And so it's all perspective, right? I mean, there's a holiday, and, that holiday is, it's in question. Should we be celebrating a holiday of a person who wasn't a good person, right? At least he wasn't the hero that he's been made out to be when we studied history when we were kids. That was one of the things we had to do in this school. We had to form a project, and I had this thing called the Columbus Awareness Project. And my idea was that when people heard the alternative story of Christopher Columbus, that they would, change their opinion about him and the holiday. And that's not true. Like, that turned out to be completely false. And this is why I'm here where I am now, because over the years I realized it's futile to convince other people to change their belief systems. You can't do it externally. People don't want to change, and they're more rigid now more than ever, right? And so that's another point of this video. But this is the introduction's going longer than I wanted to. So let's get into Hitler versus Thomas Jefferson comparison. Here, this was my original idea, and then I want to go on to deeper levels, but just look at the actions of some of these two famous men, right? And so if you ask the top 10 worst people of all time, in this particular poll, it was Hitler, right? Hitler is considered, if you ask most people who's the worst person ever to live, Hitler would be often at the top of the list, right? And so there's various lists. I looked into this, but Hitler's always he's on every one of them, right? And so when you think about the worst person that ever lived, and so this is how this guy is known. as being the worst or one of the worst people that ever lived. You talk to people about if you could go back in time, what would you do? People say, I'd go back in time and kill Hitler, right? And so he is, close to the devil as being one of the worst people. And I'm not going to talk about his accomplishments and things or try to balance it out, things that Ye was saying in his interview with Alex Jones. It isn't about that. It isn't about trying to make Hitler into a good person or sympathetic person. But I'm just saying that he's known as one of the worst people in the world. And you ask, what is Hitler known for? Adolf Hitler is unquestionably the central figure in the story of the Holocaust. It was a combination of his virulent hatred of Jews and his success in creating a political movement that was able to seize control of Germany and made a campaign to exterminate the Jews. But also, Hitler tried to conquer the world, right? He took his German army and he went through Europe and he was attempting to create world domination. And so that's the other thing, right? That he was, somebody who wanted global power. On the other hand, if you look at the top 10 greatest Americans, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, there was another list that had here the greatest Americans, Abraham Lincoln, we'll get to him in a moment. Thomas Jefferson's on this list, right? So he's also considered one of the greatest Americans. And I also picked him because Thomas Jefferson is a favorite of both Democrats and liberals, but also of conservatives and so-called patriots. People think of Thomas Jefferson as one of the greatest men to ever live, one of the most brilliant minds, right? And so I was living near his house. Here it says, Thomas Jefferson, what was Thomas Jefferson known for? Jefferson, a spokesman for democracy, was an American founding father, the principal author of the Declaration of Independence, and the third president of the United States. Also, he was known for the Lewis and Clark expedition. I watched a movie on this, like a documentary, and it talked about how not one person lost their life on the expedition and how it was just a miraculous success, that it was flawless, and Jefferson was a big part of that. Of course, also the Louisiana Purchase. We'll get back to all that in a second. But there are the things that they don't tell you about Jefferson, right? So I asked, how old was Sally Hemings when Jefferson, and I didn't say anything else here, but Google knew what I was talking about, right? And when he started R-ing her, when he started booping her, right, when she was 14 years old and his slave girl, she was a 14-year-old slave and there was a 30-year age difference, and he was a married man. He was R-ing his slave girl, right, and she had 3 of his children, who then became his slaves because they were black people. Even though they were his children, they were biracial, and they were his slaves. And so how is this a great man? Like, how is he, better than Hitler, right? Like, he owned slaves, and you can say, well, it was a time, sure, whatever. I went to Madison, Madison was one of these big old founding fathers. A lot of these guys were Freemasons or Freemason friendly. And they all lived next to each other in Virginia. I went to Madison's house, and, a lot of them, if they sold their slaves, they'd be ruined. So I can understand, the financial reasons for it. But how do you not know that slavery is wrong, right? I don't give an F of what time period it is. But it's also, how did you treat your slaves? Because if you owned slaves, there was levels of how you would treat them. Sometimes they would become more like family, or there would be there could be a worker boss relationship where, it could be, a positive place for that. You could at least make it a positive place for them to live. Just like, how do you treat your animals, your livestock, right? And so if you're R-ing 14-year-old girls and impregnating them, and then your children from that, that interaction, 3 of them, I believe, become your slave, then that's an effed up thing. That's an effed up person, right? And so that's bad enough. That's like a Jeffrey Epstein level thing. But certainly, it muddies the waters from the guy who's considered maybe the worst person in the world to somebody who's considered one of the best, right? Like, it isn't that clear, right, historically and in any other way. Like, you have to say, well, Thomas Jefferson was pretty effed up, and Like, you can't say he was a hero or a good person. I'm in the editing process, and I decided to add this or look for this. So there was a movie called Sally Hemings, An American Scandal. I'll show you a little clip from that. But they portray her as an adult woman here.
You're a damn fool, Sally.
She's not a teenage girl, right? That's a woman in her 20s. This is when they returned from Paris, France, where they had, where Thomas Jefferson was taking full advantage of her. But you see here, Sally Hemings, the documentary.
Sally Hemings, a slave woman whose name will be forever linked to one of America's founding fathers.
You mean a slave girl?
When 3-year-old Sally Hemings arrived at Monticello as part of an inheritance for Thomas Jefferson, she could not have guessed the adventure her life would become.
You mean when she was like ritualistically abused and arred by her slave owner? It's an adventure. It's an adventure. What's it an adventure? And also, he knew her since she was 3. So she was a little kid that grew up in his household. She was there for 11 years, and then when she turned 14, he started to force himself on her, right? So think about it, right? Think about what that means. Like, it's not just that she was 14 and he bought her somewhere. It was, somehow she became a slave. She was a slave girl that was given to him as a 3-year-old child, and when she turned 14, a married man, he went and took advantage of this slave girl. And so, there's no way to sugarcoat that, right?
But when we examine Sally's life and the difficult choices she made, we are forced to focus less on the possibility of a romantic relationship between man and woman, and more on the disturbing dynamic between slave and master.
Well, at least you got that, right? So, at least they're not trying to make this into a romance. There's these other things. Thomas Jefferson in Paris, and I don't know if that's Sally Hemings there. And Saturday Night Live had a little sketch on it here.
Sally, I'm Thomas Jefferson.
So there are a couple of issues here already, historically. So that's Maya Rudolph. She's probably in her late 20s or early 30s here. Probably her 30s. And she'd be 3. She would be 3 years old if Thomas Jefferson was introducing himself to her. And this isn't how it would go down, right? She was a 3-year-old slave girl. And if it was the beginning of their relationship, she would be 14, their sexual relationship. And so, again, it's Saturday Night Live, and, they're not portraying this in a way that would really show you how effed up it was, right?
The owner of this house.
I know who you are.
They're making this flirtatious, right?
Just wanted to welcome you to Monticello. I hope you'll be very happy here with us.
Well, I'm just happy to be indoors. Thank you.
That's charming.
So, minimizing what happened here. Epic television miniseries. This is Sally Hemings, An American Scandal. Epic television miniseries explain the complicated relationship of Thomas Jefferson and slave Sally Hemings, who conducted a 38-year love affair. It wasn't a love affair, right? She was 14 years old, and he was R-ing her, right? This guy was a creep. And so somehow they changed the title here, because Sam Neill was the star. He played Thomas Jefferson in the Sally Hemings, An American Scandal. But they changed it from, this was the original title, American Love Story. There's Sam Neill, and this is Sally Hemings. They're going to go for a little dance, just a little romance, a little dance, bringing her into this, the established world and all these things. This was much worse than any Me Too thing that you see, for most of the Me Too things you see, because he owned her as a slave, and then, of course, the kids as well. And there's something worse I'm going to get to. I'm in editing process. We're going to go to the effects of the Louisiana Purchase and the Lewis and Clark stuff. on the native peoples. But think about, not only just Hitler here, but compare him to Donald Trump. Like, who would say Donald Trump is a better man than Thomas Jefferson, right? I mean, Thomas Jefferson is a legend, just on both sides, like the right and the left. He's somebody who has, very positive, in terms of his accomplishments, right? But Trump didn't ever, R a 14-year-old slave girl, impregnate her, and then have his kids be his slaves, right? I mean, it's not even comparable. Like, what Trump has done isn't, nearly as bad as that, right? I mean, you can't make a case for his actions being on that level. But let's get to the other thing here, which is even worse. But the bigger issue was the Louisiana Purchase and Lewis and Clark, because that expedition opened up the West. It brought, attention to, it created, there was these mountain passes, because there's a lot of mountains. Of course, there's the Appalachian Mountains, the Blue Ridge Mountains that go along the East Coast, and then there's the Rocky Mountains and the, various mountain ranges in the western part of the country. And to get through those mountains, you had to know the mountain passes and all these other things that were, going on there. And once they established the Lewis and Clark expedition was successful. And beginning in 1803, Jefferson private letters show increasing support for the idea of removal, the Indian Removal Act, and suggested various ideas for removing tribes from enclaves in the east of their own lands and lands west of the Mississippi. So Jefferson was one of these people that started what created the genocide, the Holocaust, the Indian Holocaust, the Native American Holocaust, right? I mean, Lewis and Clark had this Sacagawea, the daughter of a Shoshone chief, was captured by an enemy tribe and sold to French-Canadian trappers who made her his wife around the age of 12. So, yeah, like this is, and she was someone who was traveled with Lewis and Clark, right? So you think the kind of abusive lowlifes that were, that were operating at that time. So there's an interesting, let me just show you this. This is what the Lakota, the treaty, here's a better picture of this. This is a good documentary. Aaron Huey, or good TED Talk, Aaron Huey, he was a photographer, went and shot pictures of the Lakota people. And so the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851 was signed in September 17th between the United States and the Sioux Indians. And if that treaty had been honored, this is what the United States would look like. This would be the Lakota tribe. This would be their lands, right? And so, there was just this, this idea of Indian givers, right? This term Indian givers, but it was, the United States government that kept on changing the terms of their agreements and going back on their deals and things like this, as they exterminated a large portion of the population of the Native Americans peoples, right? And these tribes, many of them took slaves themselves. Even, it said, Sacagawea was taken by an enemy tribe and sold to white people. I mean, there was, these tribes weren't innocent. They were warlike themselves. They had their own, their own issues. They fought wars, took slaves, they did scalped people. I mean, there was all these things, right? Okay, so I just want to insert something here. I'm in the editing process. And, the point of this video, and I want to say it in various different ways, is we don't know boop, right? We just don't know anything. We think we know, but we don't, right? And, there's always deeper levels to the story, even on the material world. For example, when I first started working in treatment centers with kids who were called sexually reactive, but they're basically little sex offenders, right? So I worked in 2 treatment centers, once as a counselor, then I got my master's degree, and I worked in another treatment center as a clinician. And, when I worked as a counselor, I worked in the milieu. So you acted like as a surrogate for the kids' parents in a way, right? It was, it was a jail-like environment, but it was still, that's the role that you're playing, right? The adults in their lives. But then later on, I worked clinically where I was the, as a therapist for these kids. They were on, I had 12 kids on my caseload, and I was assigned to getting them through the treatment requirements and dealing with their social workers or their parole officers or whatever it was, right? Working with their, the people in charge of their lives. And then also working with their parents in terms of if they were going to reunify with the family and all these things. But before that, I worked as a counselor. And we had therapists that would come in, a job I would later do. Two different places, though, so it's something different. But at this place, they would have the therapists come in and work with the staff, meet with the staff. And one therapist was assigned to our unit, and they would, they would present things and talk about the kids and what's going on with therapy or whatever. And so there was one therapist who was pretty good, who I respected. She was a good, she had good ideas and was good communicating with, the staff, right? And she brought in a case file. And she talked about the way this mom treated their kids, right? It was pretty graphic, and the mom was just a horrible mom and a horrible person. And it was just, when you heard all the, we would get these case files, which would tell the story, like somebody would write it up. They would do an intake, some psychologist somewhere, some social worker, and they would give their assessment of family dynamics or the person's life, and usually would be diagnoses for the client, and you would get family history and things like this. And so this mom had like 3 kids, and the way she treated her kids, and, she was like a drug addict and all these things, and, the kids were like prostituted out. I mean, just horrible stuff, right? And she goes, how do you feel about the mom? And so everyone went around the table, and I was like, oh, like they hated her, right? I mean, she was a monster. But then she pulled out a second case file, and she read the mom's history, like all that she had went through. And she was just this, she was like ritualistically abused or whatever through her whole life and all of it. And so then it was like, oh, well, now we understand why she did what she did, right? And so when you get into all of that, right, when you get into all that I'm talking about here, the complexities, like it's easy to demonize one group, like people of color, Native Americans, black people. Some of them just think white people are evil. Like they think it's just like white people are just all evil. Just like some people think Jewish people are evil. Like it's just, and then some people think that people of color are evil, right? And, even in the Christian religion, it's basically stated that if you're not following Christ, you're going to hell. So, there's this idea for Christians that if you enslave people but you give them Christ, you're saving them. So, they think that slavery was a good thing because you have all these people who are going to hell and they didn't have Jesus, and now they have Jesus, right? And so there's all these different ways of looking at it, all these ways that you could say that white people were better at inventing weapons and at warfare, and they were better at slaving people, but the other people did it as well, right? We know this, like there was this interview, and I won't show it here, but Don Lemons was asking this spokeswoman for, this was after the Queen died, about slavery in England. And she said, well, yeah, let's, we were the first to stop it. And, she bragged. Now, of course, England's one of the worst things when you get to the Queen, right? But she talked about how there were tribes, there were kings and leaders in Africa, black people, who were enslaving other people there and selling those slaves to white people. So, there's all this stuff, right? There's no way to figure out, what's going on here. There's too many moving parts, and there's too much going on just on the surface, on the material level. Never mind the idea of some scars and things that I'll talk about later, right? This idea of past impressions and past lives and what's going on at a spiritual level. And so there's just too much, right? There's just too much history. There's too many, interacting, moving parts, right? But judgment and judging people and playing on people's emotions is something that the people that are in control of the system do. And again, they're often demonized, the people I call the controllers, but just think about how it would be without them, and it wouldn't be great. Like there's just always going to be issues with human beings. Human beings are flawed in various ways, right? There's a slave mentality and like a slave master mentality in a bad way. That there's just there's something just broken within the collective, the human social system and the human psyche and things like this right now. It can be reversed, but it has to be, it has to be excised out, like it's painfully taken out, like the downward spiral, the tendencies toward going demonic and going against God that human beings have, right? And that's the point of what I'm doing here. Like it's, I'm going to say this in various different ways. People want to know, like they want to say, this is the bad guy, this is the good guy, whatever it is, right? But going back to these, native tribes, these native peoples, you can see they populated the country, right? They were inhabiting this land, and there was like at least 100 million, maybe 120 million, right? There's 300 million now of people in America, and so there's Native American people all over the place, before the white people got here. And so, there was a number of them, like with, over 100 million people here. And there's a book called The American Holocaust, 100 Million Native Americans Killed, right? And so there was a whole pushback by Jewish American people that, they felt like they owned that term, the Holocaust. I mean, but what's worse, what Hitler did was killing 6 million Jewish people, or Thomas Jefferson opening up the West and all these founding fathers and people like them, including people like, Abraham Lincoln, these other people, in terms of the extermination of the native peoples, right, that were there. And so, again, it's not so clear now, right? If you think about all the stuff I've just presented, I'm not saying one person's worse and one person's better. I'm going to talk about this on a spiritual level. And really, I don't care. Like, what am I? We all could have our opinions, right? But Thomas Jefferson, he's done at least as much damage or even more damage to peoples in terms of, his behavior. His slave girl, who he had an abusive sexual relationship with, and his children, and then what he did to the Native Americans. And, he was somebody who pushed for Western expansion, which created all these traumas and tragedies in the Native American population, right? So, I do the Sahaj Marg Heartfulness meditation. And the third master of the system, Master Charji, who was just somebody who had a gift for just knowing stuff, right? He was just, brilliant at, things that he said about, whatever it was, in this case, American history. He had a past life as a Native American. He remembered, certain things that when he was here in America. But he said that, and I'm paraphrasing here, that white people did a service in terms of connecting the world. And their ambition, whatever it might be, right? Whatever personal ambition, like Christopher Columbus, and wanting glory or wealth or power or whatever their personal reason for that, we'll get into the royal family as well. It was supposed to happen. It was part of a divine plan. We can kind of see it, right? There needed to be people who were, with some sort of aggressive tendencies that were willing to go and, this is before airplane travel, right? Going and braving the seas and going to other countries. And there had to be some, motivation for them to do that, right? Because people had to be brought together on a global type of a situation. It was something that was necessary for the next stage of our evolution. It was part of the divine plan. But the abuse and the treatment of the people that happened wasn't a historical necessity, right? Like that wasn't part of it. It didn't have to go that way. Like, of course it did, and of course it would, but it wasn't necessary. Like that wasn't, that was a byproduct, right? Because there could have been a way, and he described it in terms of everybody getting together and taking what was best. In fact, he said that about America. He said, he liked America, and he came here quite often. He said, you could have taken the best from every culture in the world, because America is a multicultural place where people from all over the world with different cultures, different, people, you could have taken what was best about each group, but you've taken what's worse, right? You've taken, the America has collectively been about, the crime families in every, the criminal element of every culture, or, the gangs, or the mafia, or whatever it is, right? And so it's pulled out the worst in people instead of celebrating what is best, which is, a sad thing. And again, it's the Kali Yuga, and there's, reasons for all this, the downward tendency towards things. But it's there, right? We see it. And so you want to make certain people villains because it just bodes well to do that, right? I've said this before, that when I worked as a psychologist, as a counselor, and I read through the DSM-4, now it's the DSM-5, I realized that everything in the book was negative, and the system was never to blame. This dysfunctional system that we all know is unnatural and pulls for negative behaviors is considered like, divine, and there's nothing in the psychological world in terms of the official story, the official diagnosis is that blames the dysfunctional nature of our system for our psychological issues. It's always the individual, right? It's always the Trump. It's always the Hitler. It's always the Kanye, the Ye. It's always the Kyrie. When they want to demonize somebody, it's the Elon Musk, right? They want to demonize, it's the, anti-vaxxers. It's the, whatever it is. But it's never the system. The system is beyond reproach. The system is never at fault. It's people. It's individual people. Everyone else is good. Everyone else is, but there are some bad apples out there. That's how it's viewed. Blame the individual for a system that sucks and brings out the worst in all of us. Another interesting thing, I read this quite some time ago. Ugly precursor to Auschwitz, Hitler said to have been inspired by the U.S. Indian reservation system, that he studied the way America treated the native peoples as a way of, genocide, a way of ethnic cleansing, and he thought it was a good idea. Hitler the coward, who later commits suicide rather than face the music, was incontrovertibly one of the worst and most brutal, bloodthirsty bastards to ever walk the globe. Yet little is known that he was also a plagiarist. And so he was inspired by the way Hitler was inspired by the way the Americans treated the Native Americans, right? It was something that he copied. The other one thing I want to talk about is Abraham Lincoln here. I'm going to move over to, doing my voiceover. It's easier for me to do it that way. Okay, so I was going through some of my images of, some of the things I covered in my Abraham Lincoln video. I couldn't find the video. I don't remember what it was called. I don't know if I deleted it and it's not up on my channel, and I have to, go into my, my hard drives and pull it out, and it's just not worth it because I have some of these images. But this was the first image that I pulled up, and I forgot all about this, right? Just to get a sense of Abraham Lincoln. The largest mass execution in the U.S. history 150 years ago today. Lincoln ordered the execution of 38 Dakota Indians for rebellion, but never ordered the execution of the Confederate officials or generals because, they were white, right? That just tells you everything you need to know. Because, as brutal as Lincoln and Grant and the North was on the South in the war, very brutal war, a lot of war crimes, a lot of stuff against, families and people. I mean, just brutal. But it was, not as bad as what in terms of his treatment of the Indians. On December 26, 1862, 38 Dakota Indians were hanged in Mankato, Minnesota, in the largest mass execution in the United States history, on the orders of President Abraham Lincoln. The crime, killing 490 white settlers, including women and children, in the Santee Sioux uprising the previous August. So think about all this, right? Now, there's a history here of the natives being slaughtered, their families being slaughtered. So it wasn't like they were the first ones to commit war crimes. Like, obviously not, right? They were here, and all of this stuff here, all the things that went on in America and the crimes against the Native Americans, and then, the oppression they were under. But they go in and they kill women and children, right? And so that's, brutal in itself, right? But Lincoln had the ability to order mass executions. Imagine if Biden or Trump had that. And so, think about that. Like, there was no sense of rule of law or justice. And so they were screwed over in terms of their treaties, and they were, depopulated from their lands and things. And then they go out and they kill a bunch of white people and their families, and then they're executed. And this is something that Abraham Lincoln presided over. So you can't, you can't talk about Lincoln being somebody who, the kind of person that he's seen as, somebody who was for justice and racial equality, and he just wanted to free the slaves. No, come on. That person didn't exist, right? There was no one like that was in power or ever was, in terms of the American history. So I did a long video on this. There's people have commented wanting me to unlock that video or to make it available. I don't remember the name of it, but I covered this quite extensively. And Abraham Lincoln was somebody who was not a good person, right? Not the person that people think he is, because he was racist. He said the N-word on various occasions. He was somebody who gave a speech in South Carolina, and he was mocking the idea of white men wanting to be with black women or white people marrying black people. And so he said that would never happen. Of course, all these former presidents were R-ing their black slave women, right? And so, many of them, at least Thomas Jefferson, we know for sure, right? And a lot of these guys were. And so it was it was my first truther thing that I did when I was I was like probably 8 or 9 years old, and I had to do a report, and I came across a more sophisticated book, like an adult level book. It talked about how the Civil War was a war of is an economic war. The South was, because of the warmer climate and maybe perhaps the having more slaves, free labor, or whatever it was destroying the North economically and was gaining all the power. This power would have been in the South because of the, there was more resources and a longer growing season, all these things, right? And so the South was out competing the North economically. It wasn't because of the Northern people being great people. You see some of the way they went about their battles, burning Atlanta, right? Some of the way people were treated. It wasn't like the Northern, Lincoln and the Northern politicians in the Northern states were nice people, and they really were upset about slavery. Some people were. There were always a few people, who are just, a cut above. But this was an economic war. And Lincoln said disparaging things about black people and, shouldn't be considered one of the greatest people. And I'm not, going to go through this here. I'm just saying there's all this information out there, right? And this idea that history is determined by the victors. And there's a big statue of Lincoln. Lincoln's on a monetary note, right? $5 bill. Jefferson's on the 20, right? 20. These guys are on money. They have the monuments in Washington, D.C. They're considered some of the greatest people in American history. But, they're on the same level of Hitler, right? If you look at all the things they did, the Civil War was a brutal war, and, Lincoln might be maybe not as bad as Jefferson, but, could have been, right? And so these guys who were considered such great people weren't that. And you could say Hitler was still worse, whatever you want to say, but, it isn't like there's some huge gap here. If you're just going to look at actions and behaviors and the way they affected the world. Another group of people, the British royal family. There was a time where it said that the sun's never set on the British Empire. The British royal family in the British Empire, they created slavery, they created racial divide, and they conquered one country after another and exploited the people, caused huge suffering in India, caused opium addiction in China. All these things. They wreaked havoc all over the world by conquering, right? And they themselves come from these robber baron kings, brutal thugs, gang lords who rose up and grabbed power. They're direct descendants of Count Dracula, Vlad the Impaler. They've admitted that 300 years ago they were cannibals. I've shown all these things in other videos, and then just the way that they're considered now, the stuff they did with Princess Diana. It's their new documentary with Harry that's just come out. He talks about, fearing for the life of his wife and his family. Murderous people, power-hungry, murderous people who believe that their bloodline, the Queen of England carries around this orb, right? I mean, I have a whole, I have a whole thing here. I'll just, I'll play these clips while I'm going through this, right? I mean, it's just, it's pretty savage. The kind of person, the kind of people they are. And certainly, the way that Hitler wanted to conquer the world, they wanted to conquer the world as well. And the body count of people that have suffered all over the world because of the British Empire, a small little island, and once they ruled the world, right? And Queen Elizabeth and Winston Churchill are credited with being, having a stiff upper lip as Hitler bombed the crap out of London and England, these places. But it was all things that people had done before, right? And another example of this is the country of Israel, right? The idea of Israel becoming a country in, what was it, 1945 or something like this. The United Nations, which is, by at least official people, governments, and media, is considered a great organization, even though they have allowed so many wars. I'll get into Gaddafi as well in a moment. Again, looking at the other side of the story, the other side of the, the history, a different view of history, right? It says that the United Nations allowed the creation or created Israel, the country of Israel, in 1948. But at that time, before that, it was known as Palestine. There was Palestinian people there. And historically or biblically, there was an exodus from Israel. And within the Bible, it says that they had some spiritual reason for reclaiming it. And there was a small number of Jewish people living there, something like 10% of the population, 12% of the population. And the Palestinians were not hostile to them, at least, as far as I know. And now Israel is slowly claiming all of Palestine, right? Is considered a hostile neighbor to many of the people. But the way that the Israelis are treating Palestine or Palestinian people is very similar to the way that Hitler treated Jewish people, right? The way that Jefferson and America treated the Native American people, and the way that England treated, the royal family treated people all around the world. And so you have one group of people who execute this behavior. There's a Facebook group or a Facebook, some sort of, Facebook, whatever it is, page. I'm looking it up now, and there's a number of groups: Jews for Justice in Palestine, Jews Against Genocide, Jews for the Palestinian Right of Return. And there's people in Israel that are sympathetic to the treatment of the Palestinian people, right? But that's an issue. That's, a way that groups of people are being mistreated, and that's okay, right? The way that Gaddafi was treated. First, I want to show you this clip. This is from the show The West Wing. And the president, Charlie Sheen's father, Martin Sheen, is given a map of Palestine. And he wants to hang it in his office. And it was Palestine before it was, now called Israel. And this was the reaction of his staff.
It's a map of the Holy Land that was drawn in 1709.
Seriously, I'm going to have this framed. This is great.
It's titled Canaan, Palestine, or the Holy Land.
And so he's given a map of what was then Palestine, 1700, as a gift. He's a map collector, and he wants to frame it and put it on his wall.
Hey, you want to see something? It's a map of the Holy Land drawn in 1709. You're going to put it in the outer office.
This outer office?
Yeah, no. Why?
Why?
This is a handler, right?
Because some people are going to find it offensive.
Why?
What people are going to find it offensive?
Doesn't recognize Israel.
It was drawn in 1709.
Yeah.
There was no Israel.
Right.
Israel wouldn't happen for another 250 years.
Yeah.
So what's the problem with the map?
Some people are going to find it offensive.
Why?
What people?
It doesn't recognize Israel.
Sir, I know that. You can't put it up in the West Wing.
CJ.
It doesn't recognize Israel.
There was no Israel in 1709.
That's right.
So it's not on the map.
Which is what some people are going to find offensive.
So this is, this is how it goes, right? And so even though this is historically correct and it's a truth, it is being politically, again, I'm not disparaging Jewish people or, saying that they're somehow worse or more controlling or whatever than other groups. But when groups get power, this is what they do, right? Groups that have power, this was acknowledged by a very liberal and democratic show here, that there is power here, of what, he was allowed to put up on his wall, even though it was truth. It was a historically accurate map drawn of that, that period of time in that region, right?
That would be great.
If I put it someplace else?
Yes.
Let me ask you something. You may be the last sane voice around here.
Hang on, before I forget. That map that Charlie gave you, make sure you don't put it where people can see it.
I don't believe this.
Recognizing Israel's a pretty hot button, wouldn't you say?
So I'm going to put this up. I'm going to cover this on my Hollywood Celebrities Dropping Like Flies because I covered Kyrie Irving there. This is a group called Jewish Voice for Peace. There's a couple of these groups that are Jewish people, liberal Jewish people that are against the various powers in Israel and this other stuff. And they have Facebook groups. I don't read on Facebook anymore. I haven't seen this for a while. But they posted this, which I found interesting because I was covering the ADL with Kyrie Irving, right? And it's an article entitled The Unbelievable Ignorance of the ADL. The organization uses its moral authority to shield Israel from criticism while spreading misleading information about contemporary anti-Semitism. And this is by a Jewish writer and a Jewish publication, the Jewish Currents, right? And so this is Jewish people who have a Facebook page that are promoting this article, and it is against the ADL, right? Because not everybody agrees with every position of its demographic, right? See, people demonize Jewish people, which I've covered this before, but there's power groups in every society. Like you could demonize Americans, but Americans hate each other. I mean, think about how bad Americans hate each other right now. In terms of the left and the right, Democrats and Republicans, vaxxers and anti-vaxxers, truthers and sheeple, right? I mean, you can go down the list. And Americans, you could say, oh, we hate Americans because they believe this, or they voted for Donald Trump, or they voted for Joe Biden. But there's always other dissenting voices, right? And that's something to remember with all of these types of things. I've said this so many times before, that you can always find someone in every group, in every demographic, you can find somebody very much like you. Maybe it's a small percentage. For me, it's a small percentage because I'm not a normal type of a person, right? But there's people like me in every group. And the other thing that I often say, which is part of the Sahaj Marg teachings, is that hate is inside you. The hate that you have for a group or another person is your hate. They're the object of your hate, right? They're the object of the hate that exists inside of you. If they disappear, your hate will find somebody or something else. You have to remove your hate, right? There's methods to remove your hate. There's cleaning methods, spiritual cleaning methods. This is things that are available in the Sahaj Marg Heartfulness system that I do, right? And it's a part of your duty to find things inside of you, part of your life responsibilities that need to be removed. Because there's all this stupid stuff, stop hate. This is like ADL and, in the NBA and the NFL. It's stopping other people's hate. It's stopping other people's belief. It's silencing other people that you think are hateful. But what about the hate that's inside you? Because that's what you have to deal with, right? Their hate is their responsibility. Again, if they break laws, sure. If they do something that's unacceptable for society, there should be laws and whatever. But in terms of getting rid of hate, you want to get rid of hate, find the hate that's inside of you and remove it. Otherwise, stop complaining. You want the ability to hate the people that you think deserve to be hated, and that goes across the board. But you don't want to remove the hate inside of you. But then you want to say, hey, look, that person's so hateful over there, right? And so hate is something that is, the source of the hate is the person that's the hater. Anyways, so before I get into Gaddafi and Libya, and then get back to Ye and, the stuff to do with him, right? Before I get into all that, I'm going to give my behavior talk that I talk about quite a bit. If you're against a behavior, then you need to be against it in all forms, right? And I say that because I've gotten all these comments over the years where Britney Spears fans, that's like the worst group, but it could be any group. They get upset at what I say, and they say I'm being mean to her. They say that, she's someone who was an abuse survivor and that she's, a victim and that I'm being cruel or mean by making fun of her or whatever it is. And I say, well, you don't have any problem when I was mocking Cardi B, who's an abuse survivor, or when I was mocking Lady Gaga, who is an abuse survivor, and any number of other people. Like, you don't have a problem with me mocking people, just the people that you identify with, right? You're not upset about mocking. You just don't want it to be Britney Spears, who you feel some connection because she's a Southern white girl and you're, and you relate to her, right? And so, this is just an example of what I'm talking about. That if you're against a behavior, then be against it, right? Don't be against it only when your group or the people you identify with are on the receiving end. If you're historically against Hitler type of behavior, then be against it in all forms. Be against the way we were treated as anti-vaxxers. You're quick to criticize Trump and the Republicans, but you demonize the anti-vaxxers, people who were, looking more and more right as things develop. But it was our choice, right? Our choice not to get the vaccine, but we were called Jojo Magoo was calling us was saying this is a pandemic of the unvaccinated, all these things, right? Demonizing people, the way Kyrie Irving was treated, for example, and all these other related behaviors. So you're not against these behaviors. You're not against totalitarian behaviors. You're not against bullying. You're not against them. You just only the groups that you say it's okay to engage in those behaviors. And that's a big part of what I make in this video. You can say that Hitler is a horrible person, but Thomas Jefferson gets a pass for being a statutory aurist, a statutory boop, and all the stuff that he did to this girl, and then what he did to the Native American people. Or Abraham Lincoln gets a pass for, he emancipated slaves, so he's, considered a hero, even though he engaged in horrific war crimes, and he was very racist himself, and, all that implies, all the other things that go with it. And so let's get to Gaddafi. I have a whole, bunch of clips, a whole file on Gaddafi that I've put together over the years when I've talked about him. But he was a well-liked, well-loved politician in his country of Libya. He had 70% approval rating. And so for whatever reason, the United Nations decided to do regime change in Libya. And, most of the people who went deep into this, people who are doing real journalism, there was a young woman named Liz Phelan or something like this from England who had lived in the area, and she was in tears when she saw what was happening when the UN ordered the United States and France and these other countries. And Great Britain later came in and wrote a paper about this, that the reasons that they went in and did regime change were completely bogus, right? They were lies. That the real reason was they wanted to loot the country of its wonderful resources, including all the gold. Gaddafi was amassing gold, and he wanted to sell his oil for the gold dinar, creating a gold dinar, because he didn't want to back the dollar. And that would ultimately possibly create, if enough of the other countries went along with him in that region, that would create the collapse of the petrodollar and a collapse of the global economy. But the reason that this was all based in lies was that the United Nations had this thing called the Millennium Development Goals, and I'm familiar with it because when the Sahaj Marg system became an NGO, Heartfulness, the meditation that I do, became an NGO, and I was upset about it, and I got into it with other members of the system. Many of you are familiar with the story who watch my other videos. There was these Millennium Development Goals that got presented at one of the gatherings, a talk there. And Master Charji seemed to be upset that this guy was shilling his UN, stuff in front of, what they do with these NGOs is they find people that are trusted, like our trusted organizations, and they get you to vouch for the UN. The UN doesn't do anything for the organization because it's a parasitic organization, right? But these Millennium Development Goals were things that developing countries, goals, things like, child poverty, per capita income, how women are treated, partnerships with corporations and things in terms of making the country into a more economic and, more in terms of human rights and things. And Gaddafi was on pace to achieve all of these goals. There's a report, I got a copy of it. Someone sent me a copy years and years ago. It's now sort of disappeared from the internet. But it's a well-written report talking about how Gaddafi, in glowing terms, was one of the few countries that was going to achieve these Millennium Development Goals. Gaddafi came into power when the King Idris, who was a puppet king put in by Italy, right? Italy's was a close European country to, is very close to Africa and Libya, right? And they put in a puppet king who was the only king that Libya had ever had, right? So, and this guy was a horrible leader, and he was running the country into the ground. It was the poorest country in Africa at the time. And King Idris left the country. I have these images. They may line up or not. I have a whole, like a compilation I put together, but the images are there. I don't know if they'll time up right with what I'm saying, but you can see them. It's backed by all these, articles and things. King Idris was running the country into the ground, and he left. And Gaddafi, who was the leader of the military, said, "Don't come back." So it was a bloodless coup, and he took control of the country, and eventually installed some sort of democracy there. And from that point, he took it from the poorest country in Africa, to the richest country in Africa, with a per capita income of, something like $10,000 a family or something like this, whatever it was. It was a higher, people were making more money there than any other country in Africa. And he developed things. He had the greening of the desert. He created this, I forget what they called it, but he won an award for it. He developed ways of going deep into the earth and pulling out glacial water and using it to grow food and to create, just a greening of the desert, taking dry lands and pumping this water into them and changing the whole environment. And, other things that he achieved. He had this green book and all these things he wrote, and, he was giving the money back to the people, and the people actually loved him. And, human rights, and he got rid of all of his weapons of mass destruction and all these other things, right? These things that were, the things that he thought would bring down his country. And he started to engage with corporations and do, these public and private partnerships with the UN wanted, and he was going along with the program, right? And yet he wanted to create this gold dinar, and he gave a sort of provocative talk at the UN, where he said the UN has allowed 65 wars since it's been created and all these other things. And one day they decided just to take him out, even though he was doing everything he was supposed to do, right? They did regime change. There was this story that Hillary Clinton negotiated his surrender, but these thugs that were brought in from places like Iraq, these groups that later became the group ISIS, and they were brought in from foreign countries by America to create, civil unrest. And we know about this in terms of the CIA and Operation Ajax in Iran years and years ago, where they had a very moderate, democratically elected leader in Mossadegh, and he decided that he wanted, instead of sharing the profits with BP, British Petroleum, 80-20, he wanted a 50-50 split. British Petroleum created the infrastructure for the oil that was being drilled and taken from the Iranian oil fields. And he said, well, since it's our oil, we want 50%. And so the BP went to the CIA and said, okay, let's get this guy out of here. And so they created all this chaos. There's a great book about this from, I forget the guy's name, but it's how the CIA kills countries. And they decided to do regime change, leadership change, and they trumped up a bunch of charges against this guy. And they created chaos. They brought thugs in, and they got him out of there. Then they put the Shah of Iran in, who was a brutal dictator. I've covered this so much, right? And then this has been admitted to. The CIA has admitted to this. It was like 60 years ago or whatever it was. And there's, been movies made about it and things. And so that's how they do things, right? And they were doing it to Gaddafi, even though Gaddafi was a great leader. And they were saying, oh, he's being mean to his people. We got to save him. Because they wanted to sound like they're the heroes. But they didn't want him doing a gold dinar. And they decided to do regime change. And they looted the country of the gold and all these other resources. The British Parliament has confirmed this and other mainstream organizations, right? And so, these behaviors, I mean, you think about Gaddafi when I was a younger person, the Back to the Future movie, the Libyans were, Dr. Brown stole plutonium for his time machine vehicle, and he stole it from the Libyans, and they end up killing him. And, there was all these villains that you see. The Russians were villains, and then it was the Arabs, and then it was the homegrown terrorists, right? They demonize people in groups. And, but there's an overwhelming evil empire of violence and oppression and colonialism and, all of it, right? And these heroes that are so-called heroes that I've listed who, we now know, if you don't know already, the things that I've presented here, the royal family, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, they were slave owners and they were not good people, right? They were not the people that, we are led to believe they were, right? I want to get into a sort of a deeper understanding. I want to go to a narrative to close this thing out, right? But just a few more things I want to get to. And so Michael Cohen, who was a convicted criminal, who went to jail for his dealings with the Trump organization as a henchman, as a fixer, a lawyer who fixed problems like paying off porn stars like Stormy Daniels, who had an affair with Trump and things like this, right? And he went to jail. And he's being celebrated now by MSNBC and CNN. He has multiple books, and I'm going to cover this tomorrow or, whenever I would have already covered this before this video comes up. This video is I'm going to upload it and go through whatever I have to go through because of the title and things. But I would have already covered this. But Michael Cohen, Trump core supporters are maggots that just refuse to step away. And so this guy who's a convicted criminal and just a sleazebag is calling other people maggots, right? And he's being celebrated as a hero, and this guy's pitching his books. You'll see this. You've already seen this if you watch my other video that I'll make tomorrow or whatever. Like I said, this video will be up, but not public for a while. And so that happened, right? Like that happened. That's how bad Trump's being demonized, that they're treating this guy like he's a hero. But when he was working for Trump, he was a villain, right? They made fun of him, but then he got busted and went to jail and then turned on Trump, and now they're interested in what he has to say. This is everything I'm talking about here. So Jojo Magoo, I want to get into this here. As his comparison as a human being to Donald Trump. I think they're basically the same guy. That's how I see it. They both have the same problem. They're both old, old school. They're both gropers, and this guy's worse than Trump, but Trump is a womanizer, right? Trump saying grab him by the you-know-what, grab him by the boop, right? Grab him by the boop. And Joe Biden just, slathering all over, sniffing and snoozling women and girls and children and all that stuff. And they have similar issues, like similar narcissism. They have a lot of the same sort of personality characteristics. But Jojo Magoo has been a lifelong politician and is willing to do what the powers that be tell him, even if it's something pretty, graphically in terms of war-related stuff, right? Where Trump seemed to push back. Trump didn't have any military issues during his presidency. There wasn't him, droning kids and things like this, right? And so let's start here. This was the Afghanistan withdrawal that I don't blame on President Joe Biden, but Senator and Vice President Joe Biden. He has a share of the blame about Afghanistan. I don't think it was bad to get out of Afghanistan because it was a failure and it was, it was time to leave, right? But the way we were leaving, the way America was leaving was horrific because we were leaving $80 billion in weapons to the Taliban, which was what we were told all along was a horrible, basically terrorist group, a hyper-religious, torturous group. And all the Afghani people that helped America and thought about Afghanistan having a better future and who were against the Taliban were going to be tortured or ostracized or killed or whatever it was, right? And so all these people we were leaving behind were, in desperate circumstances because we were bailing on them because we went there based on all these lies, right? And JoJo was receiving a lot of heat because it was a disaster. And nobody likes America quitting a war to be someone who surrenders. And, I don't mind him doing it because it was the right thing to do. But he was receiving all kinds of heat. And so all of a sudden there was a new group that made it into the foray.
There are real and significant challenges that we also have to take into consideration. The longer we stay, starting with the acute and growing risk of an attack by a terrorist group known as ISIS-K.
What? ISIS what?
An ISIS affiliate in Afghanistan, which is a sworn enemy of the Taliban as well.
So that was very convenient because we were leaving all of our stuff to the Taliban and we were leaving the Taliban in power. And Jojo Magoo wanted to now change the narrative about the Taliban, right? And so, there's nothing better than having a good sort of, war story that was developed here, right? To help deflect from the debacle that was the Afghanistan withdrawal. So it was very convenient that the ISIS-K came along. We never heard of them. Didn't exist, right? But here they were. ISIS-K, right? It's not really believable to anybody who has a sort of critical thinking skills. Very convenient that they're coming around and they're sworn enemies of the Taliban, which makes the Taliban sort of on our side and we're working together.
Every day we're on the ground is another day we know that ISIS-K is seeking to target the airport and attack both U.S. and allied forces and innocent civilians.
Why? Why would they be doing that? Why in the world would they be doing that? Run the risk that you'll stay there or come back into the region? It makes no sense. Like, you're leaving. Why would they do that?
Additionally, thus far, the Taliban have been taking steps to work with us so we can get our people out. But it's a tenuous situation. We're already had some gunfighting break out. We run a serious risk of it breaking down as time goes on.
So there's this new thing called ISIS-K. We just heard about him. And again, he was getting hammered by the media. They were just completely focused on this debacle.
This evening in Kabul, as you all know, terrorists attacked that we've been talking about.
Then we said that they existed, and then we said that they were going to do this, and then they did it.
About that the intelligence community has assessed, has undertaken an attack by a group known as ISIS-K.
And look this is a tell here, like, clear your throat, you liar.
Took the lives of American service members standing guard at the airport and wounded several others seriously. He had also wounded a number of civilians, and civilians were killed as well.
Okay, so now this thing that they said changed the whole narrative, because now this became the story. This is how they, wag the dog, right?
The Pentagon says 2 ISIS-K members were killed and 1 injured in a U.S. drone strike in Afghanistan's Nangarhar province.
In this strike, they lost a planner and they lost a facilitator, and they've got 1 wounded.
Defense officials have not.
They're talking about killing the leadership, right?
Saying in part, the situation on the ground continues to be extremely dangerous, and the threat of terrorist attacks on the airport remains high. Our commanders inform me that an attack is highly likely in the next 24 to 36 hours.
It's going to happen. It's going to happen. So these are the titles of the videos, just searching Joe Biden, a new group called ISIS-K. Addresses ISIS-K attack, Biden warns of ISIS-K endangering evacuations. Biden, we are not done with you yet. Let's watch this one here.
But I also know that the threat from terrorism continues in its pernicious and evil nature. But it's changed, expanded to other countries. Our strategy has to change too.
It has to change.
We will maintain the fight against terrorism in Afghanistan and other countries. We just don't need to fight a ground war to do it.
Exactly. You don't need that.
We have what's called over-the-horizon capabilities, which means we can strike terrorists and targets without American boots on the ground.
Well, sounds great.
Or very few if needed.
Looks like he's CGI'd into this thing here.
We've shown that capacity just in the last week. We struck ISIS-K remotely.
Did you?
Days after they murdered 13 of our service members.
Exactly. You got them.
And dozens.
How dare they?
Of innocent Afghans. And to ISIS-K, we are not done with you yet.
All right, we already saw this, but we didn't see that one part. And so you're not done with you yet, right? So there's just all these video. Biden sends warning to ISIS-K. Who are ISIS-K, the terrorist group? These are all from a year ago. President Biden, right around that time, in August, early September, late August. President Biden, ISIS-K is a sworn enemy of the Taliban. ISIS-K responsible for Kabul bombings. We're not done with you yet. All these things that he said, right? And so what that ended up happening was they ended up droning a bunch of civilians and 7 children, which was admitted to finally, in their desire to paint a narrative where they were using this new technology of identifying targets and droning them instead of fighting expensive wars. They were, there was a number of mishaps that happened, and the worst of which was 7 children. But then here, newly declassified video shows U.S. killing of 10 civilians in drone strike. Even the New York Times got in on it, right? And so this is the president of the United States killing children. So how can you say that Jojo Magoo is better than Trump? I'm not saying Trump is good. I don't like Trump. I think Trump's weaseled. He's gotten more weaselly, turned on his own people, right? Turned on his people, his supporters and things. But he didn't drone children, at least not anything that we know about. There was no reports of him droning children. He didn't drone innocent children, which Biden did. So how can you ever say that Trump is worse than Biden? Trump might not be great, but is he worse than Biden? Well, no. Okay, so I just want to put a montage in here. I was going to put it in, and somehow I forgot what I was going to do with it. I was going to talk about Ye a little bit, and I do a little bit in the voiceover that's coming up at the end here. But think about how ferociously they went after Ye. They've taken $2 billion of his money, deplatformed him, and they also are talking about medicating him and isolating him and, doing more. Joe Biden droned kids. Barack Obama droned kids, right? I mean, Thomas Jefferson was what he did to Sally Hemings and the Native American, all these things I presented you here, right? And this is how they're talking about Ye. Just think about this as we go into the last part of this video.
At this point, I don't think Kanye is off his meds so much as he's immune to them.
Ye and Steph, I really want to say this very quickly. If we don't step up here, this is a problem.
Kanye, I know you're like, yo, this is the real me. I'm off the meds. Take them. There's no shame in the medicine game. I'm on them. It's great.
We certainly are. This is a time when we have to step up and stop it.
DEFCON 3 on Jewish people? It's just abhorrent.
Yeah.
It's abhorrent behavior. I hope he gets help. I hope his children get help from him.
Harley Pasternak threatens to institutionalize Kanye West back to Zombieland. Of course, we read this before, but here's the tweet again. I'm going to help you in one of a couple of ways. First, you and I sit down and have a loving open conversation, but you don't use cuss words Everything that is discussed is based in fact, not some crazy stuff that dumb friend of yours told you or you saw in a tweet. Second option, I have you institutionalize again, where they medicate the crap out of you and you go back to Zombieland forever. Play date with the kids just won't be the same. So it's a confirmed historical act that Jojo Magoo wanted to fight a different sort of a war, was promoting this idea of using drones, which, Obama droned kids as well, George W. Bush as well. When you're droning people, you're taking these guys are playing basically a video game. They're sitting, maybe thousands of miles away from the drone or whatever, controlling it or whatever it is, right? They're not there in the actual field, and they have some intelligence that says they're so-and-so person. I mean, that's the official story. And they, fire a missile from these drones into civilian populations, and sometimes they get it wrong. And when that happens, they kill children. And so it's a horrible thing, right? But if you say you don't believe the official story, and if the official story isn't true, and Jojo Magoo just did this as some way to distract from the collective failure of the U.S. military, the scam that these wars were, all of the failed wars, killing 1 million people, civilians in Iraq, that we had no business being there, based in, all the weapons of mass destruction, all that stuff being false, and all the other lies that, failures and lies of these wars. And he was taking a lot of heat for it. And he couldn't say the Taliban were the bad guys because we are now handing the country over to the Taliban. And so to create a new group, or to say there was a new group, or acknowledge some new group, right? And then to drone these kids because of it, because of political appearances, well, that's a different level of evil, right? Something we never saw Trump do. Trump sold out his people. Trump sucked in lots of different ways. But again, this is like, to me, another level where innocent people died in a country that you're leaving worse than it was before we got there. Now they have $80 billion of American military supplies and training, and you supercharged the Taliban and whatever else is going on there, right? And then they disappear, right? Jojo Magoo said, we're going to fight these groups. We're going to fight them. ISIS-K, this new thing, and these other groups. And they haven't been a story about it since. Like, when's the last time he talked about this, right? Like ISIS-K, they were so, oh, yeah, we got to get these guys. We're never going to stop. Well, we're going to get them. Well, what happened? Like, what happened? Like, where'd they go? Right? All we hear you guys talking about is Trump, 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 right? Like, Trump is talked about more. But ISIS died under Trump. And the reason they died is Trump didn't order them to do anything, because ISIS was a controlled asset of the American intelligence community, and I've documented that in other videos, right? But what I'm saying here is, the official story is always bogus, and there's lots of layers to it. And, Biden was stuck with a mess, partially which he voted for and created as a senator and vice president, but someone had to get out of Afghanistan because it was a disaster. And it wasn't going to end well. Like, we screwed that country. We wrecked that country. That country is way worse off now than they were before. This is the act of an evil empire, right? Which is another thing. I talk about America being an evil empire, right? And so, how is Hitler worse than any of our presidents and leaders that have perpetrated crimes all over the world, right? It's just subjective. You want to call one, a-hole a hero and a great leader, and you want to call another a-hole the villain that he is, right? They're all villains, right? They're all villains, and who can rate them? And let me get into the divine aspect of this now, because I've covered the rest of this sufficiently. But there's a deeper level to look at this, and this is the idea of a divine plan behind all of these things. Okay, so as I switch to the narrative portion of this, I just want to wrap this thing up and make the major my point I want to make with this video. Obviously, there's all the evidence there. This last thing I just talked about with Jojo Magoo, he started off with talking about this new thing called ISIS-K and ended it with droning children. And the media didn't scrutinize him for it. Like, he got away with all of that, right? Because he was taking heat. Like, it was a failure. It was a debacle, his withdrawal from Afghanistan. But then he created this new ISIS-K thing that fit the mold. You know, Americans love a good war story, a good us against them. You know, it was almost like we were the underdogs, right? And then the tragedy of losing 13 American soldiers, and then, you know, all of it, and then, you know, kids getting droned, and it's all over, and we move on to something else. It never was held accountable. It won't come up again, right? Like, he murdered children. America murdered children for no reason, right? On the way out, a good FU to a country that we just wrecked, and then we're leaving, right? That's America, and we're all part of that. We're all part of that, you know, what ended up happening. But this idea of the spiritual essence of something behind a divine plan, behind the play of things, the story, the show that we all see, that we're all a part of, right? Our own, you know, the way our lives play out. And the one thing I can say that is, to me, the most important thing is you find out what your sole purpose is here. You find out what God wants you to do, and you do it, right? The role that you're supposed to play, and you embrace that role. You embrace your part in the whole thing selflessly. You do what you're supposed to do. And sometimes that might be being the villain, right? Sometimes you might be perceived as the villain. But that's what God, you know, that's the role that God cast you in, right? But the problem with that is there's lots of people who suck at, you know, their egos are so big, or they're so mentally ill. You know, they can't listen to their inner voice. They can't connect to God internally. I mean, they can, but they're so far away from being able to do that. They're too gross. Their egos just are, you know, controlling them in such a way that the inner voice they hear is some distorted, I mean, whatever it might be, some distorted, part of themselves that is far away from reality. And so that's, you know, that's where the issue is with so many people. So many people just don't have the ability to figure out what God wants them to do and to do it. But ultimately, that's what we all have to do. It's not for me to judge. It's not for you to judge other people. It's for us to eventually, with humility and self-discipline, a disciplined mind, and, you know, a strong heart, figure out what we're supposed to do, and let our soul and God guide us through our lives, right? And it's, you know, it's such a difficult task for something that should be so simple and easy, right? And so if you contrast this idea with, I went and ate lunch and I went for a walk, but I want to wrap this video up. It's an important video, but I'm just, you know, we all are. No, I'm really into it. This idea that you find your soul's path, as opposed to following an egotistical path and thumbing your nose at God and your soul and hijacking your life. Like, it's comparable to, let's say you're playing a video game and your avatar gave you the finger and said, your controllers no longer work on me, and I'm just going to do what I want, right? The character you were playing in a video game just decided to go rogue and not follow your directions. And so that's the difference here. And most people are doing the latter. Most people, their egos have gone rogue, and they're just doing things on their own, or they're doing, you know, sort of following the plan because the plan is there. There are things that we can't escape. There are things that we are supposed to do that are going to happen no matter what, and they're out of our control. And we think we're making decisions, but we're really not. But how we conduct ourselves, the attitude that we have, and that's probably the biggest part. Are we grateful? Are we happy to be serving God? Are we, you know, embracing, you know, the highest level of our nature, right? In those moments, things that are out of our control, but we can control how we conduct ourselves in those moments. You know, Christopher Columbus was supposed to come to America, but did he have to kill all the Indians when he got there, or the native peoples when he got there, right? Maybe England and the Europeans were supposed to go around the world and connect the world, you know, and That's all part of the plan. But do they have to oppress the people and, do what they did, right? Colonize the people. And so there are choices that we make within those, the structure of the divine narrative. And you're going to be the enemy to some people. Like to people in the Sahaj Marg Heartfulness organization, the community, I'm not a community member. I'm a loner. And I'm always an outsider. Like I'm an outsider in the truth community. I'm an outsider because I'm a truther or whatever this is, right? And I'm, an outsider because I'm dyslexic. And I'm an outsider because I'm an introverted, right? I'm an introvert. I'm an introverted. And just, my personality configuration, I'm always like, and I don't look at it as being like some, horrible thing. It's something that I prefer, right? But I always end up being sort of an outsider. And in the Heartfulness Sahaj Marg organization, even then, it's a fringe group. Very few people do the meditation, especially here in America. So it's a fringe group, and I was sort of a fringe member, and now even more so. And to those who know my story, I was ostracized and considered a villain. Of course, I've been critical now of the current master of the system, so even more so, because he's involved in scams and just a failure. In fact, I'm making a video on I have a journey series that's up to part 81 or 82 now, 82. And one of my viewers sent me this, where the current master of the system's talking about Hitler, and he says Hitler killed 8 million Jews, and then he says he burned them alive because he believes that the ovens that were used were real ovens, right? And, it's a long talk, and he's talking about Rama, there's Krishna and Rama in the Hindu tradition, which I'll talk about in a second here as well. And he just messes up the stories. He's just really bad at all that stuff, right? Which has been a real bummer for me because I know him, and, I felt like we were on a good terms for a while, and I had great hopes for him as the president of the system, but he just laid an egg, right? It was just bad. Like he's just been bad and failing and destroying something that I love, right? And because of that, I'm considered a villain by lots of people in the system. There were people calling for my execution, right? And this is the one community that I sort of care about, right? That I was part of. But to them, I'm a villain. But many people who listen to me here, I'm a hero, right? And some fringe group of people, who do the Sahaj Marg system and agree with what I'm saying, to them I'm a hero, right? It's just all subjective. The guy who started me in the system, he's a guy who came from Jewish descent. He was born a Jewish person. And he was a great preceptor for me. He's fell on some hard times, and, he just, he had his own, personal issues, and I guess he had some mental problems. I haven't seen him in years, but sometimes I think about those couple of years that I went to him as my preceptor, and he was just so great. Like he'll always be cool with me, right? No matter, how other people see him, he was great for me. Like there are people out there that are, villains and bad people, but, for a few people in the world, they were great. Sometimes there's people who just suck all the way around, but there are people out there who are, maybe for some people they're a hero, and some people they're a villain. Some people they're a saint, some people they're a sinner, whatever it might be, right? It's all based in people's subjectivity. I have young people who come and watch my videos and say, oh, I wish you were my dad or something like that, right? But 3 out of my 4 kids I'm estranged from. Like one committed suicide, but, we were estranged before that, right? They didn't think I was that great a dad, So, I mean, it's all relative, like people's, your performance and what you do and the roles that you play and, how cleanly and how, elevated you perform your tasks are really important. It's really important that you, even in those, dire moments, find some gratitude and, embrace the higher nature and, work on your character qualities and work on, having like a code of conduct and ethics. I mean, there's all the things that we can do to perform as well as we can in this boop show here on planet Earth, right? I mean, it's a real, horrible place. in different ways, especially right now. Really not horrible, because it's beautiful and wonderful at times, and difficult and traumatic at others, but it's kind of a mess right now. And as we work through this mess, connecting to the divinity that's within you is, to me, the most important part. That's why I do the Sahaj Marg meditation, right? And there's some interesting stories from the Hindu tradition, the Ramayana. There was this guy named Ravana who stole Rama's wife, Sita. And I don't know that much about it, but he's considered the villain, right? He's considered one of these Hitler-like people in India. And my family and I went to this acupuncturist. He was kind of an acupuncturist. But his tradition came from Ravana. Now, Ravana lived in what's now Sri Lanka, and he kidnapped this princess, and there was this epic battle, sort of like the Mahabharata, a little less so. And that's the story, the meat of the story. And you ask most Indians, is Ravana a bad person? They said, yeah. Ravana is one of the sort of demonic kings. But Ravana invented, according to this guy, the first acupressure-like system, a healing system based in the body's energy. He also invented the first martial arts long before it got to the Eastern world, the Asian Oriental world, things like this. And so this is years and years ago, 50,000 or more years ago. And so Ravana was somebody who was, now is considered a villain, but this guy said, there was things that he contributed to the world that we still use today, right? Like he was an innovator of things that are still used, worldwide, that are positive things. This is related to, Kanye West saying that, Hitler invented some things, that Hitler did some things, and Ye said these similar things where he said everybody has a gift. And these were positive things that he said, but they were ignored when he said the things he said about Hitler, like the things he said about Nazis and Hitler. He was demonized, right? But he also said some things that are accurate and true, but those things were overlooked, right? If you look at now Elon Musk, who is, there was a thing on CNN the other day where they're saying he isn't the richest man in the world anymore. He's getting a beating, Twitter's getting a beating, just because he's exposing the crimes, at least the moral crimes that Twitter did. And again, I'm not saying Elon Musk is a hero or whatever he is, right? I don't know. Like, it's not I don't care. I'm just watching this thing I call the show, right? But in terms of the show, Elon Musk, of course, Trump is enemy number one, and the media is being obsessed with him. And, he's the worst person in the world. Of course, he didn't drone any kids, but that doesn't matter because that's the narrative. He doesn't have a crackhead son who sold influence to his presidency, but somehow he's worse. Kyrie Irving made the, horrible, villainous decision not to get a vaccine in his body. He made that choice. And because of that, he was demonized across the board. Lost, all these people have lost money. They're all, Elon Musk lost billions of dollars. Kanye West, Ye West, who we get to, we know. He's been villainized and demonized, right? And all these people are demonized. And like I said before, as being a person who's trained as a counselor, has a master's degree in counseling and worked with the DSM-4, the counseling world never says, there's nothing in the counseling world that says the system sucks and it makes people worse, which it does, right? This is a bad system, a demonic system. And so you have these four people, they're the villains, they're the problem, right? They're the cancer on humanity. They're not like Abe Lincoln or Thomas Jefferson or any number of these founding fathers who owned slaves and were bad people and committed wars and war crimes and the rest of it, right? The Queen of England, who's celebrated her death and a long history of violence and, all these things, not only, outside in the world in terms of colonialism, but also how they treated members of their family and just, it's really icky. It's a mess. And so, there's a lot here. There's another story from the Mahabharata. There was this character named Bhishma, who's probably the most developed character, even more so than Krishna, in the fact that he is just duty bound, right? They had a thing called dharma then. And the Mahabharata was supposed to be the end of the age of Dharma, which brought in the Kali Yuga, the age of iron. Dharma was about doing your duty for God, right? And Bhishma's dad, these were when people lived for thousands of years, like before there was different stuff going on there, in terms of, there's lots of evidence they were like giants and, other things that were going on, right? Things that are, considered crazy, but they've been suppressed. And if you say things like, they're like, oh, you're nuts, right? But anyways, Bhishma's dad wanted to bang this girl. He was, infatuated with this young woman. And she was very manipulative. And she said, well, I'll only let you sleep with me if you make your son renounce his claim to the throne. And Bhishma, being a very dutiful son, said, sure, I'll do that. I imagine your dad coming to you and saying, I really want to, be with this young woman, but she won't let me do it unless I make you renounce your future, right? Like, F you, Dad, right? But that's not how Bhishma was. Bhishma followed a strict code of behavior and was very loyal to his father. And then the father went back to the young woman, and she said, okay, but also he's got to have no children, because those children, she wanted her children to have the throne. So she wanted to marry this guy and then have him father some children with her, and have her children become the future kings and whatever it was. And so she said, well, not only that, but he has to renounce having any children. And so not only will he not be king, but he can't be married or can't engage in sexual behavior. So he said he agreed to that. So he's called Bhishma, the guy with the terrible vow. That's what his name means, right? And he's just fixing problems and putting out fires. And there's a bunch of dopey kings and, horrible princes and all these people. And he's just fixing things for people all along and, all this stuff. And then he has to, because of duty, be on the side of the sort of villains, the Kauravas. There's the Pandavas and the Pandavas, I don't know how to pronounce it, and the Kauravas. He's on the wrong side out of duty, so he has to fight the heroes. And, finally he fights Arjuna, who is his, nephew, who was, sort of the hero of the war. And he's got all these arrows going through his body. Like he's got, like 20, 30 arrows that are piercing his body. And he falls down, and he's laying there sort of hovering above the ground in these arrows that are in his body, right? And he lives for like 100 days. And Krishna comes up to him, and he's like, WTF, right? He's like, WT boop. Like, what the boop? And so, Krishna, what's happening? He says, and Bhishma says, I looked back 100 past lives, and I found nothing but, that I did good in all those lives. How could this be happening to me? And Krishna said, well, if you looked 101, you see that you had a life as a prince, and you took a snake and you threw it on some thorns. And so you're suffering the same fate. And so there's, interesting, like, Mahabharata is a lot of it's kind of head scratching. There's interesting stories and things like this, right? But we don't know what we've done in the past, and whether you believe in past lives or not, you came from somewhere, and you don't know what your role was. I mean, it's hard to figure out what your purpose is here. That's a big part of your life, is to figure out your purpose, right? And you don't know the play of things. Like sometimes things just go against you, right? And so Donald Trump was considered very successful. I remember seeing him on the David Letterman show, and David Letterman was praising Donald Trump for fixing this ice skating arena in Central Park. All these other people had tried it, and Donald Trump was the only one to be successful. Donald Trump was very famous and very well loved. And he had that Apprentice show, and he was, again, he had positive, people thought positive things about him, right? A little bit less then, but still, he had a good reputation. He was embraced by the city of New York, and rappers loved him, right? There was all these rappers that loved him, and, he was, part of the sort of in crowd. And there wasn't much negativity against him. But they ran for president, and now he's the worst person in the world, right? Kyrie Irving was a great basketball player that hit a game-winning shot against the Golden State Warriors, played crazy good basketball, in the NBA Finals. And then he had a few issues, left the Cleveland Cavaliers and left the Boston Celtics, and then the vaccine thing happened. And all of a sudden he's a villain. He's a horrible person, selfish, and all these things. Ye West, again, when he was Kanye, he had some issues along the way, some drama, things that I think were funny. To me it was performance art. He had an up and down reputation, but now, he's one of the worst people. Elon Musk, celebrated rich guy, billionaire, right? But now he's opening up Twitter. I mean, you can just see the headlines and the way that the media is treating him, right? And sometimes it's just the play of things. Sometimes it's just, how the ball bounces, right? And, but other people's opinions don't mean anything. It's really what you think about it, and not just your ego. I mean, especially not your ego. Knowing that you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, right? Knowing that your soul is supposed to be doing what it's doing, right? There are these things called samskaras, which are impressions that are carried on from life to life. If somebody has an addiction and they don't cure the addiction, they don't beat the addiction, then they'll have that coming into their next existence. It's impressions that form around a person's etheric heart. That's the, idea of how things work in the Sahaj Marg system, that you leave with impressions, you leave with things that you did that were, maybe against what your soul was supposed to, whatever it was, that you lost focus of your true purpose here, right? And, you leave with these things that left lasting impressions in your system and on a soul level, and you're going to come back here and have to do it again until you master and clean those things off, right? And that's the way that I see the world. And for each person, that's a personal relationship, and no one can know better than you, although most people don't see it. They're afraid to look at themselves in that way, right? They're afraid to look inside and see what they see. The divinity, they're as much scared of their own divinity as they are of their own sort of demon that's inside of them, their ego that's hijacking their existence and going on an ungodly path. And that's unfortunate, right? People are, scared of the truth of the nature of their system, the divine nature and the demonic nature. And they, just look outside themselves and focus most of their attention on other people and, what those people are doing or not doing, right? And so that's kind of the purpose of this video, right? There's a much more profound, a deeper way of looking at things. But people want things in a neat little box. You were told Hitler is bad. You're told Thomas Jefferson is good. And that's just, Abraham Lincoln is good and Donald Trump is bad and Joe Biden is good, whatever your belief system is. And you just want to see it that way, right? If there's a villain, there has to be a hero, right? Whoever is fighting the villain is the hero. And, you identify the villain, you identify the hero in that sense. But it's just much more complex than that, right? And, it's for each person to figure out themselves whether they're doing things right or not. But most people never even think about it that way. Anyways, only spirituality will save this world. It's Paul Romano, definitely pointing from the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.